Hey everyone, welcome back. After a 6-week-long ballot recounting process, the pink wave continues to ride through Latin America. Socialist candidate Pedro Castillo just won the presidency in Peru over Keiko Fujimori, the daughter of the infamous and one of the few dictators from that era to be charged with crimes against humanity, her dad Fujimori. I can't remember his first name, and I don't want to open a new tab. But yeah, the election was really close. As you can see here, it's like a 0.25% margin in an election with over 17 million votes cast. It came down to 44,000. But the question remains, with his victory in hand, what does this mean for the future of Peru? What does this mean for the future of Latin America? How long until the right wing of his country tries to expel him from the presidency? All really good questions. Hopefully I remember to address all of them in this video, so let's get into it. First, let's listen into some clips from his inauguration speech, because it seems his goals, now that he's president, shifted a little bit since the time he was on the campaign trail, as I guess could be expected. So I want to take a moment to see what he has to say.
I start by greeting my brothers, the ancestors of this country, my brothers, the teachers from the Quechua, the Aymaras, the Aguajún, my brothers Chihuinos, the symbolic day of the 200th years of the independence of Peru. I'm very proud to be here today. Despite the fact that we commemorate such a symbolic date, our history comes from long before that. Our ancestors found the way to resolve problems and to live in harmony with the riches provided by the Kingdom of Spain, allowed the riches to be stolen.
He's saying that in front of the King of Spain, by the way. Pretty baller move, if you ask me.
Injustice ended in many of the indigenous people being exterminated. 40 years later, the independence of the Kingdom of Spain in 1821 didn't achieve a better living for the Peruvians, and we were second citizens.
This is probably as good a point as any to bring up the symbolic importance of his victory here. Not only just in him being, a rural farmer winning the presidency, which saying out loud is still fucking wild to say, but also in, the getup. Not only are some of the pendants drawn from native cultures, but also this fit is the one that Evo Morales of Bolivia was known to wear. So there is kind of this desire to not only enfranchise peoples in Peru that were long forgotten, but to kind of establish a pan-Latin American movement here, hence, the pink wave.
In previous years, just the 70s, many peasants and uncountable Peruvians continued living as slaves until all adults could express their vote and have their rights, which in 1992 was frustrated by the coup, and until today some of the regulations are still in force. But thanks to the popular vote, we are here today, and this time a government for the people is here to rule for the people and by the people. And it's the first time that our country shall be governed by a peasant, a person who, like many of the Peruvians, is from the suppressed classes.
Going back again to the sort of larger context of his victory here, it is really interesting that both earlier in this century with, Evo Morales in Bolivia, but Pedro Castillo here in Peru, there is a very large indigenous wave of enfranchisement through not just, them fighting for their rights to vote, but also then electing people that represent them and fight for their interests. So it is cool to see.
And that a teacher, more specifically a country teacher, is chosen to be the constitutional president of the Republic. This is a great honor for me. And due to the sweat of my ancestors, I'm here. I have resisted. My life is suffering the cold of the country.
This translator's not not doing it for me. Just got, I couldn't do any better. I quit Duolingo Spanish after a few months, but doesn't make this any better.
I was a child who studied in a school in the countryside, and today I'm here. I want you to know that you have my word. I will not defraud you, and we will not defraud you. The health in our country will be something fundamental, a fundamental right which the government will ensure, and it will be the first priority of the government. We will create a universal system of health which will be decentralized, allowing first medical care in order to grant health to the country. And we will ensure that 5,000 health centers are created so that no family in Peru will not have medical cover.
That's a pretty bold plan, actually, that I hadn't really heard talked about in some of the other articles that I have pulled up. So that's cool, you know, and that's probably, especially for a country like Peru, is the way to go with bringing in universal healthcare, is also boost the presence or number of, you know, healthcare facilities, you know, especially in rural areas, which, believe it or not, I'm pretty sure he'll have covered. Okay, so unfortunately, I mean, he gave like a multiple hour long inauguration speech, and it seems this clip from Al Jazeera here, which was the longest clip I could find that wasn't just the full-on speech, didn't really include some of the bits I was hoping for. I guess I had hoped they would cut around, but, you know, they were covering this live. So let's take a look at an outline for his updated agenda. He outlined a vision for a much-changed country, one where attending universities would be free, but unemployed youth who are not in school would be conscripted by a military redeployed for engineering and public works projects. Yeah, this part of the story came out in the last few days. He's going to bring back, I guess they used to have it, and then they got rid of forced conscription, and now they're bringing it back, which on its own is a thing we could discuss, you know, the morality of, I guess. I'm not necessarily a big fan of that, but it is neat to see that he's, you know, flipping this conscription into, rather than having these, you know, soldiers sit around in a barracks all day, putting them to public work. And being someone who's, believe it or not too familiar with Peruvian politics, it also makes me wonder if maybe as president he has more control over the goings about of the military in a way that he might be able to make this happen as commander-in-chief quicker than he would be able to make a comparable, you know, like jobs program pass through their Congress. So maybe that's a part of it too. Indigenous languages will be used inside government offices and by state officials in parts of the country where they predominate. So yeah, believe it or not, as a country that was colonially occupied for centuries, there are some internal issues with the extent to which indigenous languages are used separate from, you know, the colonized language. So it's great to see that once again, of the many identities that he represents as president, he's going to bring indigenous issues to the forefront. A little more unfortunate, and this goes into some stuff we'll talk about later about this interesting kind of mixed politics he represents. Immigrants who commit crimes, he said, would be deported within 72 hours. So on top of these other, you know, social programmy things, he's also taking a hard-lined immigrant stance. And apparently, you know, there's some inner politicking issues within Peru about, like, you know, similarly anti-immigrant sentiments directed at Venezuelan immigrants. He sought to temper fears that his government would enact a series of far-left policies, including nationalizations and land seizures, saying property rights would be guaranteed. This is one of the more interesting moments from campaign to presidency, because it could have just been bad fear-mongering reporting that brought this to my forefront, but I do remember much bolder claims about, like, how they're going to bring about, you know, to use his phrase, no more poor people in a rich country. But whether he wanted to do this or not, with the reports of course, capital flight in the wake of it looking like he was going to win, you could argue this is a concession you kind of have to make if you don't want to get coup'd by the CIA. But more to the point, for the immediate impact of helping Peruvians, it is clear that he's going to renegotiate contracts with, you know, foreign investments or, you know, people within Peru that are kind of extracting resources for their personal gain. Now, how that functions, whether it's like fees or different taxes or something like that, not entirely clear yet. Again, he just got in office last week. but he seems very intent on mentioning that it will not involve nationalization. For some people, that might be a bummer. For others, that might be, a welcome sign. To each their own, as it were. He vowed to rapidly create 1 million new jobs, at least some of them temporary, through public works projects and other state employment. The rural teacher also promised to declare a national emergency over the need for improved education. He said he would beef up agricultural production, it's a good pun there, clean up the all-important mining sector, and attack the cancer of corruption. He promised to enshrine a country for the people in a new constitution with the input of indigenous groups, Afro-Peruvians, and labor unions. So yeah, it's yet to be clear how exactly the sort of democratic process would work for this new constitution, but that was a really big selling point of his, is that he wants to update the previous constitution, which came, if I'm not mistaken, from the previous Fujimori regime. And with any luck, if it turns out as well as it seems it should, or as well as I'm hoping, with the input of all these other groups, it won't be nearly as criminally neoliberal and won't as heavily favor, foreign investors and all that. Finally, going back to talking about symbols and all that, he's not going to reside in Lima's government palace, the way that in America there's, the White House where the president lives, there's plenty of big cities, have plenty of, mayor's mansions and all that. He's not going to live there, as he puts it, trying to break with colonial symbols to end the ties of domination. So we can see that this 10-gallon hat of his is going to be filled to the brim with lofty policy goals. Please forgive me for that dumb joke. I'm really tired and trying to energize myself here. But, as we know is the case with any liberal democracy, just because you sit down and say you have these cool ideas doesn't mean you're going to make them happen. So let's talk about some of the obstacles to Castillo's desired reforms. First off comes the fact that his Free Peru party doesn't have a majority. In fact, he only has 37 of the 130 seats, while his opponent, who, just narrowly lost the election there, has 24. There are quite a few more parties with quite a few differing ideologies that make up the coalitions he'll have to be working with, going anywhere from, Christian democratic to, like a full left-wing parties. So trying to get a coalition together to agree on anything, let alone all these very specific things, is gonna be tough. It's also important to note, another obstacle to the success of his presidency might be that he's not president for long. Even though, to a complete shocker to me, the claims of voter fraud from Fujimori in the election were disputed by various organizations such as OAS, as well as the internal court findings in Peru, I totally did not see that coming. This had the 2019 Bolivia election written all over it. And I actually thought that was more likely in Peru's case, because in Bolivia's case, the 0.6% vote differential was about whether or not to hold another runoff election, not whether or not Evo Morales had more votes. Like, as we can see here, it's a 10.6 difference. The issue, of course, was that the 0.6 was disputed, and detractors claimed that meant there should be a runoff election of some kind. But we now know from about 2 years of hindsight that the initial OAS claims were bunk. The math was wrong there. But in the case of Peru, with, again, it switched back to Spanish. That says 44,000, not 44 million. With just 44,000 votes, I thought it was going to be a shoo-in for Fujimori to claim fraud here. So it wasn't, but I almost hesitate to say wasn't, because it could, in like a week, change again. For all of they could pull some fake email or something, and then that could blow up, and who knows what could happen from there. But it seems like his victory as president is, for the moment, secure. But another issue becomes how long the opposition will care to have him as president. Because, as I've learned as a result of, familiarizing myself with Peruvian politics here, there's a part of their constitution that says the presidency can be vacated for moral and physical incapacity, have used to out presidents with, I believe, a simple majority a lot. It's a big part of the reason why they had 4 presidents in 5 years, is because because, there were charges of corruption which need be addressed. But all it took was for a simple vote to get rid of one guy, and then 2 days later get rid of his replacement, and then get rid of the next guy until, they reach some sort of president that the majority party then didn't take issue with. Which, again, depending on how the coalitions in Bolivia kind of shake out, it could easily be the popular force plus 42 other seats from these various parties get together, and they could just decide to oust Castillo if they wanted to. And then all of a sudden, who knows how long down the line that would go until they found a president they accepted. But again, Castillo is kind of altering the rhetoric he had during his campaign to try to appear more moderate, so there's a part of me that thinks this will at least go on a little while before big Western press and Western pressure gets behind ousting him. I get the sense that maybe it would come off as a bad look if day one, or I guess it's been past day one, if 2 weeks from now they try to oust him for absolutely nothing. I don't think that would go over well. I wouldn't put it past them because, of course, there's a vested financial interest in making sure that nothing that he wants, no matter how pared down it is, gets passed. But I'm at least cautiously hopeful that won't happen anytime soon. But in general, I think this is a welcome sign for not only Peru specifically, which, is getting over decades of not only corrupt government, but of, violent dictators like Fujimori's daddy, but more specifically, again, for a resurgent pink wave in Latin America, like Chile, just speaking of constitutions here, just voted to rewrite their constitution. Plus, I just learned this reading some of these articles, the capital of Chile, I can't remember what city that is because I'm a dumb American, elected a socialist, which is cool. You also have Lula surging in the polls against Bolsonaro. Not to mention the fact that, going back again to Bolivia, the movement towards Socialism Party came out in even bigger numbers in the re-racked election of 2019. In support of Morales' successor. So with all of these leaders in these countries, there are moments where I kind of wish they'd take it a little farther. But, the threat of capital flight is really, really severe for these countries, especially considering I keep forgetting Peru has one of the highest COVID death rates. So the last thing they need is for all the money to evaporate and then they're left just absolutely dirt poor. So hopefully the reforms he can get through will bring about some modicum of improved quality of life, and hopefully they don't make too many foreign investors mad to the point of wanting to coup his ass. But finally, there's something I want to end on, and I don't really have a good answer for this. It's just something that I find really interesting, maybe for a future video, is the fact that while we have Castillo here, a firm left-wing candidate, coming out of nowhere to win an election on a very pro-worker platform, he also carries with him a very socially conservative set of politics. He's against abortion, he's against gay marriage, he's against legalizing marijuana. Though I believe he said in an interview at some point, and I couldn't find it looking for articles today, that he would be okay if the democratic process of the Constitution came to the conclusion that they wanted something a little bit different when it comes to abortion or gay marriage than him. I believe he said he'd be open to that, which is a positive, He's not so hardline as to say, oh, well, all of a sudden I'm going to reject this Constitution. But I do think it's really important to look at and kind of talk about how some of these socialist mass movements, both in American history as well as, Latin American history, seem to strike this odd coalition between economically progressive policies and socially conservative, or backwards, if you will, policies. This right here reminds me a little bit of the New Deal coalition, how you did have forward-thinking progressive politics, but you also had this huge base of socially conservative segregationists mixed in with this pro-worker mass movement. And I really don't think I have a good answer as to what we're supposed to do here other than to, support any sort of mass movements that pop up in Peru relating to social issues like abortion and gay rights and all that. But it's certainly no reason to oppose the socialist president in one of the most anti-abortion countries in the world just because he's also anti-abortion. which is of course how you saw the headlines early on in this election process written, kind of trying to like almost scare the woke scolds away from supporting him. And part of my issue with that framing is that Fujimori wasn't that much better about social issues as well. She was also socially conservative, so it's not like this was an issue between like a social progressive economic conservative versus an economic progressive social conservative. It was really just an anti-abortion daughter of a dictator who wanted to continue the neoliberal status quo, and, you know, this also socially conservative farmer guy with a big old hat who wants to, you know, help make sure people aren't hungry. So not to say that you don't already know this, lovely, intelligent viewers out there, but takes those headlines about like, he's anti-abortion with a grain of salt. You know, let's take a moment to recognize the way that that's trying to manufacture consent, especially, oh my God, I can't even imagine how big that line of attack would be if he does eventually get coup'd, or if the election fraud claims had made it through their courts. Like, I could just see the New York Times articles now about like anti-abortion socialist president ousted or whatever. But that's about all I had to say. Just wanted to let y'all know the sort of ins and outs of what was happening here. So let's turn it on over to the pre-recorded outro. Be sure to toss me a like and subscribe down below. But if you really want to help me out, you can join me over on Patreon. Patrons get access to exclusive behind-the-scenes content, like early versions of every video, and exclusive Patreon-only videos. Plus, if you join the Piley Benton's Biggest Boys tier, you get your name read off at the end of every video, which I am about to do once I pull up the names. Zoth, Sean Locke, Revo Pregame, Emily, Nillik Elites, Floof Pants, and Cameron Fordo. So if you want to hear your lovely name read off at the end of every video, be sure to join me on this specific tier. Thanks much, everyone, and I'll see you next time.